She pressed her hands against his chest and felt his heart beating. Weak, fading, barely there. The blood was spreading fast across the white marble floor, and everyone around him had already run. His bodyguards, his men, his so-called loyal soldiers. They had all disappeared into the shadows the moment the gunshots rang out. But she stayed. A maid, a stranger, a woman with nothing to her name and everything to lose. She tore the hem of her uniform without thinking, pressed it hard against the wound, and whispered words she didn't even know she believed anymore. "Don't you dare die. Not tonight." And somehow, he listened. Nobody ever talked about what happened in the Shin mansion on the night of October 14th. The staff were paid to forget. The security footage was wiped clean. The newspapers the next morning said nothing. But those who were there, the few who didn't run, they knew. They knew that the most dangerous man in Seoul owed his life to a woman who disappeared before sunrise. Her name was Amara. Amara Ose had come to South Korea the way most people come to a foreign country, chasing something. In her case, she was chasing survival. She had grown up in Accra, Ghana, the eldest of 4 children, raised by a mother whose hands were always working and a father whose chair at the dinner table had been empty since Amara was 9 years old. She had been smart, brilliant even. She had won a partial scholarship to study nursing in Seoul, had worked 2 jobs to cover the rest, had sent money home every month without fail. But life had a way of testing the ones who could least afford to fail. 3 years into her studies, her mother fell sick. The money dried up. The scholarship lapsed when her grades slipped from exhaustion. And suddenly, Amara found herself in a foreign city with a degree she hadn't finished, a visa that was about to expire, and a bank account that made her stomach hurt to look at. That was how she ended up at the Shin estate. The domestic agency had placed her there on a Thursday morning. They didn't tell her much about the employer, only that he was a wealthy businessman, that the pay was generous, that the rules were strict, and that the previous 3 maids had all left within a month. When Amara asked why, the woman behind the desk smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes and said, "He has high standards." She should have walked away. She knew that. But the number on the contract had 3 zeros she desperately needed, so she signed her name and told herself it was temporary. The Shin estate sat in the hills above Gangnam like something out of a dark fairy tale. Black iron gates, stone walls covered in ivy, a driveway that seemed to go on forever, flanked by trees so tall they blocked the sky. The main house was enormous. All clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and cold, expensive silence. The kind of house that looked beautiful from the outside, but felt, the moment you stepped through the door, like it had never once been a home. The head housekeeper, a sharp-faced woman named Mrs. Yoon, walked Amara through the rules with the speed and warmth of someone reading a legal document. No speaking to Mr. Shin unless spoken to. No entering the East Wing without permission. No questions about guests. No personal phone use in the main halls. No eye contact that lasted longer than 2 seconds. Amara listened, nodded, and thought, this man must be absolutely exhausting. She didn't meet him that first day, or the second. She moved through the house like a ghost, cleaning, organizing, staying invisible the way the job required. She learned the rhythms of the place, deliveries that came at odd hours, men with hard faces who arrived in black cars and left without eating, voices behind closed doors that went quiet the moment anyone walked past. She was not a naive woman. She had grown up watching adults navigate dangerous things with careful silence, and she recognized the texture of this house for what it was. This was not just the home of a businessman. On the fourth day, she met Shin Jae-ho. She was polishing the banister on the main staircase when she heard footsteps above her, heavy, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that expected everything to move out of their way. She looked up and saw him, and her first thought, embarrassingly, was that no one that dangerous should be allowed to look like that. He was tall for a Korean man, broad-shouldered, lean, with a kind of face that had clearly once been beautiful and was now something more severe, more weathered, like a sculpture that had been left out in the rain for too long. A sharp jaw, dark eyes that moved across a room the way a camera moved, taking everything in, giving nothing back. A scar ran along his left jaw, thin and pale, barely visible unless the light hit it right. He was wearing a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he was looking at her the way someone looks at a piece of furniture they don't remember ordering. "You're the new one," he said. His English was clean, accented but precise. "Yes, sir. Amara Osei. I started Monday." He looked at her for a moment that stretched just slightly longer than was comfortable. Not with attraction, at least not then. More like assessment, like he was calculating something. "Mrs. Yoon showed you the East Wing policy?" "She did." "Good." He walked past her without another word, and Amara turned back to the banister and exhaled very slowly and thought, "Okay, he's that kind of man." She met the child on the 5th day, and that changed everything. She had been asked to bring fresh linens to a room on the 2nd floor, a room she hadn't been assigned before, tucked at the end of a quiet hallway with a small, handmade paper star taped to the door. She knocked softly, heard nothing, and pushed the door open. And there, sitting on the floor in the middle of an otherwise perfect room, was a little boy. He looked about 4 years old, with round cheeks and his father's serious dark eyes, and a small wooden toy car in his hands that he was turning over and over as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. He looked up at her and blinked. "안녕하세요," she said, smiling. "Hello." He stared at her for a long moment, clearly surprised by her face, her voice, the warm brown of her skin. Then, slowly, he smiled back. It was a small, cautious smile, the smile of a child who had learned to be careful with his trust. "Hello," he whispered. His name was Ji-woo. She learned this later, from Mrs. Yoon, who delivered the information with the weight of something she preferred not to discuss. Ji-woo was Mr. Shin's son. His mother had died 2 years ago. A car accident, officially. Mrs. Yoon did not say what it was unofficially, and Amara did not ask. What she could see plainly was that the boy was lonely, in the specific, bone-deep way that only children who have learned not to need people can be. He had toys, and a large room, and clothes that fit perfectly. But his face, when he thought no one was watching, was achingly quiet. Amara started bringing him small things. A tangerine left on his bedside table. A drawing of a lion she had done quickly on a piece of notepaper. She had always been good at drawing, one of those small, useless talents that makes a hard life slightly more bearable. One afternoon, she knocked on his door and asked if he wanted her to tell him a story while she tidied his room, and he nodded so fast that something in her chest cracked slightly. She told him about Anansi the spider, about the turtle who carried wisdom on his back, About the girl in her grandmother's village who once outwitted a king with nothing but her voice. Ji-woo sat on his bed with his toy car in his lap, and his mouth slightly open and his eyes wide. And for those 30 minutes, he looked like exactly what he was. A 4-year-old boy who needed someone to talk to him like he mattered. She didn't realize that, down the hall, the door to the study was open. She didn't realize that a man with dark, tired eyes had stopped working and was listening. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit that like button and subscribe. There are so many more stories like this one waiting for you. 3 weeks passed. Amara found her footing in the house, learned which staff members were kind and which ones were watching, and kept her head down the way she'd always kept her head down. Not from fear, but from strategy. She was building towards something. She was always building towards something. She had sent half her last paycheck to her mother in Accra and used the other half to register for an online nursing module that would let her continue her degree remotely. She was tired, always tired, but she was moving forward. Then, on a Tuesday night, she was coming back from the kitchen with a glass of warm water for her own room when she heard it. A sound from behind the east wing door. A sound that didn't belong to the usual nighttime quiet of the house. Low, laboured breathing. A thud, like something heavy falling against a wall. She stood at the door for 3 full seconds. She knew the rules. She had been told the rules clearly. But she had also spent 2 years studying to be a nurse, and there was a sound behind that door that her body recognized before her mind did. She pushed the door open. The room beyond was a private lounge, leather furniture, low lighting, a bar on one wall, a desk covered in papers. And on the floor, half slumped against the base of an armchair, was Shin Jae-ho. His shirt was dark with blood on the left side. His face was pale in a way that frightened her immediately, that specific grey-white that faces go when the body is losing the fight. His eyes were open, barely, and when they found her face, there was something in them she hadn't seen before. Something human. Something afraid. "I told them," he started, and then his voice gave out. "Don't talk," she said, already moving toward him, already dropping to her knees. "How long have you been bleeding?" He didn't answer. She pulled his hand away from his side, looked at the wound. A gunshot. Entry but no visible exit. Left lower abdomen. Not arterial but serious. Dangerously serious. And she made the calculations she had been trained to make. Pressure. Elevation where possible. Keep him talking. Keep him awake. "Where is your phone?" she said. "No hospital," he said. His voice was barely there. "If I go to a hospital—" "I know," she said, even though she didn't. Not entirely, but she understood enough. "Is there someone I can call? A doctor? Anyone?" "My phone. Inside pocket." She found it, unlocked it with his thumb, scrolled to a contact labelled only with a single Korean character she couldn't read. She called it. A man answered on the second ring and said something sharp and urgent in Korean. She said in English, "He's been shot. He's losing blood. Come to the house, now." There was a pause, and then the man said, 20 minutes, and hung up. 20 minutes. She looked at the blood on her hands, and then at his face, and then she did what she had learned to do in every practical she had ever attended. She worked. She tore fabric. She applied pressure. She talked to him, not softly, not gently, but firmly, The way you talk to someone you're refusing to let go. Stay with me. What's your son's name? Tell me your son's name. A pause, then faintly. Jiwoo. Good. Jiwoo needs you to stay awake. You understand? So stay awake and keep talking to me. Something shifted in his face, something she couldn't quite name. He looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "Why are you still here?" She pressed harder on the wound. "Because you haven't died yet, and I'd rather keep it that way." He made a sound. It might have been a laugh. The doctor arrived in 18 minutes. He was a quiet, compact man who moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been in exactly this situation before. He looked at Amara's work and then looked at her with something close to respect. He worked for an hour. Amara stayed until she was asked to leave. She went to the kitchen. She washed the blood from her hands at the sink, watching the water run red and then pink and then clear. Her hands were shaking, she noticed. She hadn't let them shake before. She made herself a cup of tea she didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table in the dark and very quietly came back to herself. At 4 in the morning, Mrs. Yoon appeared in the doorway and told her that Mr. Shin was stable, that she should go to her room, that she should not speak about what had happened to anyone. Amara nodded and went to her room and packed her bag. She didn't fully understand why she decided to leave that night. Partly it was fear, a sudden clear-eyed recognition of what kind of world she had walked into and what it would cost her to stay inside it. Partly it was something else, something she couldn't afford to name. The way he had said his son's name, the way he had looked at her on that floor, stripped of everything powerful about him, just a man who was afraid of leaving a small boy alone in the world. She had felt something shift inside her in that moment, and that feeling was dangerous. Amara Osei could not afford dangerous feelings. She left before sunrise. She left her last week's wages. She left without saying goodbye to Jiwoo, which hurt more than she expected. She told herself it was the right thing to do. She was wrong. 2 months later, Amara was living in a Gosiwon, a tiny room in a shared housing building in Mapo-gu, working a split shift at a convenience store and a cleaning company, sending money home, studying online at night with eyes that burned from exhaustion. She had found a rhythm of survival that was familiar and manageable and completely joyless. She had made herself small again. She was good at that. It was on a grey Wednesday morning, on the subway platform at Hongik University Station, that she first realized she was being followed. She noticed him the way her instincts had been sharpened to notice things. A man in a dark jacket standing slightly too still, eyes that moved to her face and then away too quickly. She noticed him again on the street outside her building that evening. She told herself she was paranoid. She told herself this on Thursday and on Friday. On Saturday, she came home to find her door slightly ajar. She always locked it. Always. It was one of those habits that had been drilled into her by a childhood that required them. And she stood in that hallway and felt something cold move through her. She was sitting on her narrow bed, phone in hand, trying to decide who she could possibly call, when the knock came. Not a threatening knock, not a demanding one, just 3 firm, measured taps. She opened the door and Shin Jae-ho was standing in the hallway of her Gosiwon, with 2 of his men behind him, looking at her with an expression that might have been relief or anger, or both. He was dressed simply, dark coat, no tie, the scar on his jaw pale under the hallway light. He looked healthier than the last time she had seen him, which was to say he looked like himself again, controlled, contained, and impossible to read. "You left," he said. Yes, she said. You left without your payment. I was in a hurry. He looked past her into the small room, the single bed, the books stacked on the floor, the nursing module open on her laptop screen, and something moved across his face that she couldn't catch. Someone is looking for you, he said. The men who shot me. They know you were there. They know what you look like. The cold thing moved through her again. Why would they care about me? Because you're a loose end, he said. It was not cruel the way he said it. It was just honest. In my world, loose ends are dangerous. She looked at him. He looked at her. The hallway was very quiet. What are you suggesting? She said. Come back to the house. You and Ji-woo. He stopped, cleared his throat, started again. He hasn't been sleeping well since you left. She understood, looking at him in that moment, that this man would rather talk about his son than himself. That this was the closest he knew how to come to saying, I need you there. She should have said no. Every sensible part of her was saying no. Give me 10 minutes to pack, she said. The second time Amara arrived at the Shin estate, it felt different. Not warmer exactly. The house was too large and too controlled for warmth. But she was different. She moved through it without the careful smallness of her first weeks. She knew the house now. She knew its rhythms. And the house, in its strange way, seemed to know her. Ji-woo had heard the car on the driveway and was standing at the top of the staircase in his pajamas when she walked through the door. And when he saw her, his face did something complicated and immediate that made her eyes sting. He came down 3 steps and then stopped, like he was trying to be dignified about it. You came back, he said. I came back, she said. He thought about this for a moment. Then he came down the rest of the stairs and put his arms around her waist and pressed his face against her. And she held him and looked over his head at Shin Jae-ho, who was standing in the doorway, watching this, with an expression that was careful and controlled, and underneath that, entirely undone. The weeks that followed were strange and quiet, and slowly, carefully, something. Amara settled back into the house with a different role. Not exactly a maid anymore, not formally, though she still helped manage the household. Ji-woo became her shadow. He waited for her in the mornings, followed her to the kitchen, sat beside her while she folded laundry, and told him stories. His Korean and her English became a cheerful, tangled thing between them. She taught him to count in Chui. He taught her the names of his toy cars in Korean. She taught him to draw lions. He drew her a portrait that was mostly a large circle with eyes, which she folded carefully and kept. Shin Jae-ho watched all of this from a careful distance. He was not a man who participated easily in warmth. He had been made by the kind of life that burns that out of you. But he was not, Amara discovered, a cold man. He was a contained one. There was a difference. He checked in on Ji-woo every evening, sitting beside the boy's bed for exactly 20 minutes with a formality that Ji-woo seemed to accept as his father's version of tenderness. Sometimes, walking past the door, Amara would hear the low murmur of Jae-ho's voice reading to the boy in Korean, and the sound of it was so different from everything else about him that it always stopped her in the hallway for a moment. He started appearing in the kitchen in the evenings, just to get water at first, then to sit at the counter while she was cleaning up, not saying much, but also not leaving. She began to understand that this was how he talked. Not directly, not easily, but through proximity, through showing up. She started talking, filling the silence the way she had always filled silences. And he listened. And sometimes he asked a question. And slowly, slowly, something built between them out of those kitchen evenings that neither of them was quite ready to call what it was. She told him about her mother's illness, about Accra, about the scholarship and the way her plans had crumbled and how she had built new ones from the pieces. "You're still studying," he said one evening, a statement, not a question. "Online, at night mostly. It's slow, but I'll pay for it," he said. "The full degree, whatever you need." She went very still. "I didn't tell you that so you would—" "I know you didn't," he said. "That's why I'm offering." She looked at him across the kitchen counter. He looked back at her with that steady, unreadable expression. But his hands, she noticed, were flat on the counter, perfectly still. The way people hold themselves still when they're more affected than they're showing. "Thank you," she said carefully. He nodded once and left. She sat in the kitchen for a long time afterward, listening to the house breathe around her, and told herself, firmly, clearly, with great conviction, that she was not falling for this man. Now, if you're still with this story and your heart is already invested, and I think it is, go ahead and like this video. This story is only getting more intense from here. The twist came on a night in November, when the cold had settled over Seoul and the estate's gardens had gone bare and beautiful with it. Amara was in Ji-woo's room, later than usual because the boy had woken from a nightmare and she had come at the sound of his crying. She had been awake anyway, studying, and she had held him and talked him back down, and was now sitting beside his bed, watching his breathing slow into sleep. She was thinking, in the quiet way she thought about things she was trying not to think about the fact that she was 3 weeks late. She had been telling herself it was stress. It had been stress before. Her body had always responded dramatically to stress. But she had also been, for the last 6 weeks, entirely human in her responses to a man who sat in kitchens with her at night and looked at her like she was the only thing in the room that made sense. And she was a pragmatic person, and pragmatic people face facts. She had taken the test that afternoon in a pharmacy 2 subway stops away. She had read the result in the tiny bathroom of a coffee shop, and then sat at a corner table for 40 minutes with a coffee she didn't touch, doing the math of her life with the focused stillness of someone who has faced hard things before. She had been raised to face hard things. She was carrying Shin Jae-ho's child. How, she thought, was she going to tell a Korean mafia boss that the woman he had hired to clean his house was pregnant with his child, in a situation that his world would see as shameful, compromising, and dangerous? And how, and this was the part that frightened her more than any of the rest of it, how was she going to tell him without it looking like a play? Without it looking like something she had engineered? She had never in her life taken something she hadn't earned. She was not going to start now. She was still sitting beside Ji-woo's bed, turning this over in her mind, when she heard voices from downstairs. Sharp, angry voices. A woman's voice, high and cold and precise, carrying even through the floors of the large house. "She is still here! After 2 months, Jae-ho! She is still here!" Amara recognized the name before she heard anything else. Seo Hyerin. She had seen the woman twice, briefly. An ex-girlfriend of Jae-ho's, she had gathered from staff whispers, from a family connected to one of the rival organizations. Beautiful in the hard, polished way of women who had been taught that beauty was a weapon. She had looked at Amara both times the way people look at something they're deciding whether to step over. "This doesn't concern you," she heard Jae-ho say, his voice flat with the particular flatness that meant he was controlling something. "It concerns me when people in this house become liabilities," Hyerin said. You brought a foreign woman into your home, Jae-ho. A woman who was there the night you were shot. You don't think people are asking questions. You don't think our enemies are watching. Our enemies, he repeated. You know what I mean. Hyron. His voice dropped to something quieter, which somehow made it heavier. You don't give orders in my house. You have never given orders in my house. I suggest you remember that. A pause. Then her voice, soft and sharp at the same time. I heard the way she laughs with your son. I'm warning you, Jae-ho. Whatever you think you're doing, it will cost you. I will make sure of it. Silence. Then footsteps and a door closing with controlled force. Amara sat very still in the dark beside Ji-woo's sleeping form and breathed carefully and thought, this is the moment you decide who you are. She told him the next morning. She found him in his study, a rare thing, the door slightly open. And she knocked, and he looked up, and she walked in and stood in front of his desk, with her hands steady and her voice steady, and told him the truth. Simple, direct, no softening, no drama, no apology. He said nothing for a long time. She stood there in the silence of his study, in the morning light that came through those enormous windows, and let him have his silence. She had said what she came to say. The rest was his. Finally, he said, Are you healthy? She blinked. Yes. Are you scared? She opened her mouth, closed it. Then, honestly, a little. He stood up from behind the desk, walked around it, stood in front of her, closer than he usually stood, close enough that she could see the detail of that scar on his jaw, the particular darkness of his eyes, the careful, controlled working of his face as it moved through something enormous in private. I'm not going to pretend, he said slowly, that this isn't complicated. My life is complicated. The things I've done are complicated. You know that. I know that, she said. But I need you to hear me say this clearly. He looked at her with an expression that had dropped all of its careful management just for this sentence. I don't want you to go. I don't want you to feel like you have to go. And I don't want my child to grow up without… He stopped, started again. I'm asking you to stay, he said. Not as an employee. I'm asking you to stay. The morning light was very quiet around them. You're a complicated man, she said. Yes. Your world is dangerous. Yes. I have a mother who needs money sent home every month, and I'm finishing my nursing degree, and I don't disappear quietly when people try to make me small. Something in his face, something rare and genuine. I know, he said. I've noticed. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Okay. Okay. I'll stay. He exhaled. It was the smallest thing, barely a sound, but it was the most honest thing she had seen him do. What happened over the following weeks was not a fairy tale. It was two complicated people with difficult histories slowly choosing each other, which is harder and more real than any fairy tale. He was not easy. He went silent for days when his work weighed on him. He had walls that had been built over decades of a life that required them. But he showed up. He showed up in small, deliberate ways. A medical appointment attended without being asked. Her nursing materials ordered and waiting on her desk one morning without comment. Ji-woo's hand held between the two of them on a quiet Sunday walk in Namsan Park that felt, from the outside, impossibly ordinary. She told Jiwoo about the baby on a Saturday afternoon, sitting on the floor of his room with his toy cars between them. She told him simply that she had a baby growing inside her, that the baby would be his brother or sister, that the baby was going to need a big kid to look up to. Jiwoo thought about this for a very long time. Then he picked up his favorite toy car, the red one, the one he never shared, and placed it carefully in her hands. "For the baby," he said. She held that toy car and looked at this small, serious boy and thought, "I will burn this whole world down before I let anything happen to you." So Hyerin, it turned out, was not a woman who delivered warnings twice. In January, a story appeared in a tabloid, the kind of outlet that specialized in the underbelly of Seoul's elite. A photograph, taken from a distance, of Amara and Jaeho in the Namsan Park. A headline that dripped with the particular venom of a story written to wound. Shin Jaeho's secret. Foreign maid, scandal pregnancy, shame of Seoul's most dangerous family. It was calculated perfectly. It was designed not just to embarrass Jaeho, but to destabilize him. In his world, exposure was dangerous, and personal exposure was the most dangerous kind. The phone started going off within the hour. Jaeho called Amara into his study and told her what had happened, with a calm that she recognized now as his version of contained fury. He showed her the article on his phone. She read it. She handed it back. "Does this change anything for you?" he asked. "About you? About being here? About any of it?" She considered him. "Does it change anything for you?" He looked at her directly. "No." "Then it doesn't change anything for me either." What happened next moved quickly, the way things in Jaeho's world always moved quickly. The tabloid's editor received a visit from Jaeho's lawyers that afternoon. The story was pulled by evening. But the damage had been done in the way damage in powerful circles is always done. Whispered, circulated, impossible to fully retract. And Hyerin, having fired her shot, escalated. Two of Jaeho's business rivals, men who had long been waiting for weakness, used the tabloid story as cover to move against him. A shipment was seized. A meeting was disrupted. And then, on a Tuesday evening in February, someone put a car outside Jiwoo's school. Jaeho found out before the car did anything. His network was deep and his intelligence was fast, and he had people watching his son at all times. But knowing and preventing are different things, and the car was a message. And the message was, "We know what you love." He came home that evening a different kind of quiet. The kind that Amara had learned to read. Not the contained quietness of a man managing himself, but the burning stillness of a man making decisions. She put Jiwoo to bed. She came downstairs. She found Jaeho standing at the window of the main room, his back to the door, looking out at the dark garden. "Tell me," she said. A long pause. "I've made a lot of enemies," he said. "I always knew there would be a cost for that. I accepted the cost for myself." He turned from the window. "I didn't account for this." "For what?" He looked at her, and in his face, stripped of every defense, she saw it plainly. A man who was terrified. Not for himself. For her. For Jiwoo. For the small life growing between them. A man who had spent his entire life controlling outcomes, and was now standing in front of something he could not control. And the fear of it was enormous. "I need you to take Jiwoo," he said. I have a place. Jeju. A house, completely secure, no connection to me on any public record. I need you to take him there while you do what? She said. What I have to do. She crossed the room. She stood in front of him the way she had stood in front of his desk that morning. Steady, direct, refusing to be managed. Jae-ho, look at me. He did. I am not running with your son while you get yourself killed trying to protect me. That is not how this works. Amara, I left once, she said, because I was scared, and it was the wrong decision, and I have known it every day since. I'm not leaving again. She put her hand against his chest, the same way she had in all of that blood on the night this all began, when she had pressed her hands against him and refused to let him go. We figure this out. Together. That's the deal. He looked at her hand on his chest. He looked at her face. Then, very slowly, he covered her hand with his. You're going to be the most difficult thing that ever happened to me, he said. You're welcome, she said. And somehow, in the middle of all of that danger and difficulty, they both laughed. A real, helpless, entirely human laugh. And it was the most intimate thing they had shared yet. Don't go anywhere. The most powerful part of this story is coming. And if someone came to mind while you were reading this, someone you'd stay for, this like button is for them. What followed was a month of the most careful, precise dismantling Jae-ho had ever orchestrated. Not the kind that involved violence, though there was some of that at the edges, but the kind that involved information. Leverage. The careful exposure of every dirty thing that So Hye-in and his rivals had used against him, turned back on them with surgical precision. Jae-ho was not simply dangerous because of his resources or his men. He was dangerous because he was intelligent and patient, and because he had, as Amara had shown him in ways she would never fully understand, something worth protecting now. And men who have something worth protecting fight differently. Hye-in, when confronted privately with what Jae-ho had assembled, went very pale and very quiet, and agreed to certain terms of retreat. She left Seoul 3 weeks later. The rivals, destabilized by their own exposed dealings, pulled back. The threat against Jiwoo disappeared. The world settled. It was not a perfect resolution. Jae-ho's world was never going to produce perfect resolutions. There would be other threats, other dangers, other nights of burning still quiet by windows. He was honest about that, and she valued the honesty. But on a Thursday evening in late March, when the Seoul spring was just beginning to push green through everything, Amara sat in the garden of the Shin estate with her back against a stone bench. Jiwoo beside her pointing out cloud shapes, her hand resting on the curve of her growing belly. And she felt, for the first time in a very long time, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She heard the door behind her and footsteps on the path. Jae-ho sat down beside her on the garden stone, close enough that their shoulders touched. He looked at the sky. She looked at the sky. Jiwoo announced triumphantly that a cloud looked like a dinosaur and ran to chase something across the grass. I called my mother this morning, Amara said. She's improving. The treatment is working. Good, he said. I also registered for my final nursing module. I should be qualified by October. Good. You could say more than good, you know. A pause, Then, "I'm proud of you." She turned to look at him. He was still looking at the sky, but there was something on his face that was open and unguarded and quietly enormous. "I was also thinking," he said, more slowly now, choosing each word with the care of someone who had not said this kind of thing out loud before, "that the house in Jeju, the one I mentioned, it's a good house, near the water. Ji-woo loves the water." He paused. "I was thinking that perhaps, when the baby comes, we could spend time there, all of us, as a—" He stopped. She waited. "I don't have a word for what I'm trying to say," he admitted. "Family," she said. He turned to look at her now. "Yes," he said. "That." She held his gaze. She thought about a woman who had come to this country with a suitcase and a scholarship and a refusal to give up. She thought about a man who had built walls so thick that he had nearly bled to death behind them. She thought about a small boy running in the garden and a new life waiting to arrive, and all the complicated, terrible, beautiful ways that the world pulls people together when they least expect it. "Ask me properly," she said. He blinked. "Ask me properly," she said again, and the corner of her mouth was doing something. He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached into the pocket of his jacket and produced, with the expression of someone who had been planning this with tremendous anxiety for several days, a small box. Simple, not ostentatious. He opened it. A ring. Understated, elegant, chosen with more thought than his face was allowing him to show. "Amara." "Yes?" "Stay." She looked at him, at this man who was a danger and a contradiction and a father and a wound trying to heal. This man who had made her fight for every inch of his trust and had, inch by inch, given it. "I already told you I'd stay," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm asking again." Ji-woo, who had come back from chasing clouds and was watching this scene from 10 feet away with enormous eyes, said, "Say yes, Amara. He practiced." Jae-ho's expression said everything his face would never fully say. She laughed, that real, full, helpless laugh, and she said yes. 6 months later, on a warm September night in a hospital room in Seoul, a baby girl came into the world. She was small and astonishingly loud, and she had her father's dark eyes and her mother's determined expression, and Ji-woo, who had been allowed to wait outside with Jae-ho, was brought in to meet her and stood beside the bed with the red toy car still in his small hands. He had carried it every day since he gave it, and looked at his sister with the expression of someone understanding, for the first time, that their family was real. Jae-ho stood at the edge of that room and looked at his daughter and his son and at the woman who had pressed her hands against his chest on a marble floor and refused to let him go. And something in him, something that had been locked for years and years behind walls that danger and loss and grief had built, came quietly and completely undone. He crossed the room. He sat on the edge of the bed. He took Amara's hand. She was exhausted and laughing and crying and beautiful in the most honest way. No performance, no management, just a woman in the full, extraordinary truth of herself. "You saved my life," he said. He meant it the only way it was true. Not just on a marble floor with blood on her hands, but every day since. She looked at him. "We saved each other," she said. The baby made a sound. Ji-woo whispered, I think she likes the car. Jae-ho held his daughter for the first time, and his face did something so private and enormous that Amara looked away to give him a moment with it, even as she held his hand. Outside the window, Seoul was lit and loud and endlessly itself. Somewhere in the city, the complicated machinery of Jae-ho's world was still turning. There would be other nights, other dangers, other things requiring protection and sacrifice, and the particular strength that comes from having something worth fighting for. But in that room, in that moment, there was only this: a family, built from wreckage and will and the stubborn grace of a woman who had stayed. Some love stories begin with roses and candlelight. This one began with blood on a marble floor and a woman who had every reason to run, and chose instead to stay. It's not the love story anyone would have written, but it is the truest kind, built on the foundation of who people really are when everything is stripped away, when there's nothing left but choice. She chose him when he was bleeding on a floor. He chose her when the world said it was dangerous to. They chose each other in kitchens and gardens and hospitals and quiet hallways, over and over, in all the small ways that build a life. And Ji-woo, who had learned to be careful with his trust, who had pressed his face against her waist on a staircase and breathed. Ji-woo grew up knowing exactly what love looked like. Not the easy kind, the real kind. The kind that costs you something and gives you everything. The kind worth staying for. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this story. If this one moved you, if you felt something in your chest that was real, please like this video, leave a comment telling me your favorite moment, and subscribe so you never miss a story. Every week, I bring you emotional journeys like this one, stories of strength, sacrifice, and love that refuses to quit. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And until next time, stay soft, stay strong. The best stories always go to those who dare to stay.